Do you think UFOs, the paranormal, weird history, cryptozoology, and outsider art are pretty darn cool? Then you're in the right place. Welcome to High Strangeness with your host, Steve Berg.
The video version.
Hey, hello. It seems like you tuned into another episode of High Strangeness. Well, welcome, friends. Today, I have on a guy who I have known about for quite some time. A man who I've actually looked up to in the way he looks at the field of ufology and the whole para-weirdness world. And he doesn't even know this, that I've looked up to him. But, folks, I'd like to introduce you to our guest today, and that is Smiles Lewis. Smiles, how are you doing, my friend?
I'm doing great, man. It's good to be here with you.
Yeah, well, I mean, I was just telling you I'm on board. I've been lucky enough to be friends with Greg Bishop for quite some time now, and one of the things I would always ask Greg about when we were playing 9-hole pitch and putt golf is, I'm like, Greg, tell me about the zine scene. And he always mentioned your name. And I have tangentially known about you, and I've heard your interviews on Rod and Mysterioso, and I'm a big fan of the Anomaly Archives, which you run and host. And we're going to get into all that stuff. But Smiles, tell me a little bit about your and I know you probably answered this a million times, but how did you get into this stuff to the degree to where you were actually offering your thoughts and material on this?
So it's kind of funny. Most people, when they are told about me by others, they're like, oh, he's that UFO guy. He's really into the UFOs and the paranormal, which of course gives everybody a pre-existing idea of, oh, he believes in aliens and that sort of thing, which I did for a long part of my life, in the classic sense. But I also say there's other times where people come up to me, very, very rarely, but this is equally important, I think, and they'll be like, hey, I hear you're into dreams. And one of the things I credit for my interest in these subjects is, as so many of us growing up on a healthy diet, or maybe not healthy, diet of science fiction as a child, and just the various sci-fi media, depending upon what era one grows up in. But yeah, I definitely grew up in the Star Wars generation, and loved all kinds of science fiction like that. But I do think it was something in my makeup that at a very early age, I seemed to have better dream recall than a lot of people. And it's something you have to work at. But as a child, it came very, very easily. And I immediately recognized in the dream time experience that we have every night that it's our everyday connection to the paranormal, in so much as so many things that happen in dreams have a paranormal quality, or can.
Right.
I'm sure many people's dreams are very mundane, and I certainly have my quotient of mundane dreams. But I think that had something to do with it. But also, I guess definitely got to give props to my mom. I was raised by my mother, a single mother kind of situation, and she very much instilled in me a question authority, an animistic view of the world. And if there was any kind of spiritual belief system, it was akin to the Force in Star Wars, and even through, I guess, the influence of her father, just this idea that psychic powers were latent in all of us, and had some very, very mundane, in the grand scheme of things, early age psi experiences that really, I think, seeded that sense that there's a hell of a lot more to the universe than the mainstream paradigm wants to admit.
Right. Yeah. Well, that's interesting. Well, you brought up something interesting right off the bat. I mean, a few interesting things actually. But you were talking about how we almost have access to the paranormal every night in our dreams. Well, that's a great point, because I do feel like when you hear about high strange experiences or a contactee experience, it seems to operate almost in a dream logic. Almost like it's I feel like not I talk about David Lynch a lot just because I always use him as an example, but like David Lynch movies operate in dream logic,
Yeah, yeah.
so they're not tied. The answers, there's not like a 3-act structure necessarily. It's bouncing around. There's not like a little tied up bow. It's not neat and tidy at the end.
Absolutely, and that's probably why I'm such a David Lynch fan. That and my wife turning me on to onto his work. It's the weirdest thing. There was this period of time where I was working in a video store. Remember those?
Yeah,
And
I miss them.
and that was also like when Twin Peaks was coming out. I had friends that were literally doing the classic. It's like, oh, it's they're all getting together for that night and the watch parties, and I just couldn't get into it. And years later, friends when I was working in the video store were like, dude, like, you're not a Twin Peaks fan? Like, what the hell?
This makes no sense for
It
you.
makes no sense. And then it took the courting process with my then girlfriend, now wife, where she's like, I'd love to rewatch this with you. And we started rewatching it, and I was just like, I was taking notes and
Yeah, I know.
being like, this is everything I'm interested in and more. And
Yeah.
and I'd already been exposed to David Lynch. I guess probably the first thing was either Dune or Blue Velvet, and definitely just appreciated the kind of, not absurdist, but that surreal quality. And
Yeah.
I think that really appealed to me. And I think you're absolutely right. I think there's the dreamlike quality of his storytelling, and his approach to creativity.
Yes.
Ideas bubbling up from the unconscious.
Yeah, they're not mine. I'm just fishing for them. I'm borrowing them. Yeah, yeah.
And so, but also, as you say, I think the classic UFO encounters that seem really rare today. I know
Right.
they're happening, but we just, because of the paradigm we're in now, post 2017, they don't seem to be as to the fore. But they always have some kind of surreal, dreamlike quality to them.
Yes, they really do. And I'm always, and I know I have no evidence or scientific backing. I'm not a scientist. I'm a comedian. but when the weirder they are, I tend to believe them more. I know. I have no. It's not anything people should take seriously, but that's just a personal thing. Like I feel like the further they get away from a galactic federation, the more I'm like, okay, I'm interested.
Yeah, no, and that's the hierarchical nature of the contactee narratives is one of the things that informs some of my ideas about the possible true nature of the true UFO phenomenon.
Yes.
And also the UFO, the UFAUX, the false faux UFO
Right.
phenomena generated by humanity and its miscreant corporate government
Yes.
particles. I should say the views reflected by this guy here do not necessarily reflect those of the nonprofit that
Right.
that I speak for. I think that the hierarchical quality that was you described in the Ashtar Command and all these others. I mean, at the same time, again, having grown up on the old Star Trek and Next Generation and all the subsequent ones, this idea of a prime directive and utopian societies, that all appeals to me, so long as it's not doesn't have that hint of some kind of fascist militaristic element.
Right, which a lot of it does actually. So it's like I wouldn't necessarily say that UFOs are inextricably linked to fascism, which I don't think that's true. But it tends to draw a lot of unsavory people from the very get go.
Well, so maybe it is. I would not argue that, but to play devil's advocate, part of my ideas about, and I know you're not really so much into the mechanism angle, but I do. One whole part of my intuitive belief system about UFOs, and it's just speculation, is that there's this deep ecological element, and ecologies are not safe places for prey. And
right.
And so I sometimes have thought that the hierarchical aspects reflected in these contactee narratives and just so much of the UFO contact experience may be a reflection of the fact that it's all part of an ecology, and that's why McKenna's phrase that thus Cutchin has adopted for his book Ecology of Souls,
Yes.
is so resonant, even though that's focusing more on this idea of like maybe say hierarchies of consciousness in the afterlife and that sort of thing. But I know it's much deeper than that, the book. But I often look at the UFO phenomena as some kind of weird interface that is, I think, as Keel said, it's just like the weather. It's been here all along with us, and when we interface with it, we have these experiences of what seem like alien others, but maybe not. But at the bottom line, it just feels like there's some kind of weird interacting with hierarchies of consciousness, whether it's our own collective human unconscious or the collective unconsciouses of other species, the insect kingdom, the reptile kingdom, the planet herself, or something. And those are much more romantic, speculative ideas, but it's the counterbalance to it's all this fascist New World Order stuff,
Yeah. Well, no, I mean, but so one of the things I'd love to talk about with you today, which we will get to, is the piece you wrote for the wonderful book that I can't recommend everyone buying immediately, is the Reframing the Debate book, which is a kind of an amalgamation of some kind of forward thinkers, as far as I'm concerned, in the UFO world. And, you're not really going to find a lot of the mainstream ufologists in there. These are people who have been into it for a very long time and have gone through various permutations and evolutions and their ideas about UFOs, and this is where they are at today. And I think the book was I wish there was more books like that, but it is such an important book, and your chapter is an absolute standout chapter. And yesterday I had a wonderful cup of coffee and sat on my couch yesterday and reread your thing, and I was just blown away. And it actually, Smiles, resonated with me even quite a bit more in 2025 than it did in 2019 or 18 when I read it. But so we're definitely going to kind of pick that apart. I just pulled out quotes that I want to kind of go over with you, because I truly thought it was brilliant, and I actually forwarded it to 3 friends yesterday. You gotta read this, man.
Thank you. But, it's not for everybody, I'll say.
Well, I do think it is probably one of these things. It's like if you're new to UFOs, this might be over your head, but or it might be disappointing to you. But it's so important to a kind of old head like myself to have these ideas out there. But before we kind of jump into that, I'm also very fascinated by you historically, because you were a part of this kind of subculture in the late 90s, early 2000s, or is that timeline right?
I'd say early to mid 90s starting.
Early to mid 90s. Okay, okay, earlier than I thought. But so folks, before there was the internet and message boards and all this, I mean, there was a version of that going around in the 90s. But there was this underground zine scene. And I might be speculating here, but it almost, to me, reminded me, as a kid who listened to a lot of punk rock and underground music as a kid, I would buy these Midwest zines that felt very similar. But you were part of this thing with Adam Gorightly, Greg Bishop, and a lot of people who I really look up to. You guys had this zine scene when you were really young, and it was putting out really forward-thinking, important work. So tell me a little bit about how you got involved in that, and just what the scene meant to you, I suppose.
So in Austin, there was an old school hippie new age bookstore called Grok Books. I don't think I ever got to experience it when it was named that, but that was what became Book People. And Book People is still a pretty big mainstream book franchise, at least here in Austin. And this one location here in South Austin was one of the places I would always hit up for UFO esoteric books, and they had a nice periodical section. And I was into Wired, which was definitely not a zine. It was a really well published zine magazine and traditional, but it had its own kind of weird origins along those lines. But basically, one day I discovered a magazine that I was shocked to discover was published here in Austin, called Crash Collusion, by this guy named Wes Nations. His real name,
it's a great name,
Wes Nations. And immediately I was like, dude, there's somebody local that's interested in this weird array of things that I am. And his was really, it was like magic, psychedelics, conspiracy, UFOs, the paranormal. But it was, again, it was kind of like you're saying, from a DIY punk aesthetic, even though it was really well produced for being a zine. And I guess I should just say, when people think of zines, they often think of like mimeographed, like hand stitched together, whether it's like almost like Burroughsian cut up of articles and stuff. And that certainly is the majority of the classic like DIY zines. But we were kind of riding that wave of, Wes Nations and Greg Bishop and his cohorts and others were riding this desktop publishing revolution. It was the precursor to the internet. The internet was there, but it was the advent of inexpensive, God, they were so expensive, computers back then. I had to take out a loan for my first, not my first computer, but the first computer that I bought personally. I had to take out a loan for. And so I reached out to Crash Collusion's West Nations, and one of the things that, of course, all good zines did, and I would describe this as the alt media zine scene, the desktop publishing zine scene, because again, we were using then cutting edge technology for layout and stuff, mostly on Macs, old Apple computers. And but I reached out to him, and in the back of his and every other magazine like this I came across, but I think it was through Crash Collusion that I first started seeing all these other para-oriented alt media zines, including Dharma Combat and by Keith. Now I'm
Jim Keith.
Jim Keith, thank you.
Yeah.
And everything that was coming out by all these different people, Steam Shovel Press by Ken Thomas, and the Excluded Middle. That was so Crash Collusion and Excluded Middle were the ones that I was immediately most attracted to and reached out to, and got my PO box and got Wes to show me how to use the software, and it was brutally slow and painful on those old computers. But creating these scenes, and so I only put out I think I put out 3 physical issues. It was supposed to be quarterly, never could keep to that schedule. By the 4th issue, the internet was burgeoning, and I was just like, you know what, this is going to be a lot more easy. And so I started doing it in a web form. Had a pseudo last 4th issue, and all the rest of the issues, there weren't that many, were online. But yeah, in that brief period of time from like 93 to 96, maybe even 93 to 95 was when I was active as far as actually trying to put something out there. But yeah, as people describe, it was amazing. It was like the pen pal phenomenon, only for UFO obsessives and conspiracy whores.
Well, I mean, I hear about it though. I had to say though, when Greg would describe this stuff to me, and I I was just so deeply fascinated, because it really married 2 things I loved, and that was punk rock culture and UFOs. And I was like, what? This is perfect. What a dream. But it did seem like you guys it wasn't just offerings on UFOs. To me, when I go through, and I'm obviously probably most familiar with Excluded Middle, it was like the counterculture version of mainstream ufology.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying?
Absolutely.
You guys weren't talking about Roswell, or you weren't talking about the stuff that was in UFO magazine. It was like the stuff that I'm interested in now. You guys were talking about 30 years ago. You were way ahead of the curve, and it was like ultra hip UFOs, as far as I'm concerned. So how did you what were the influences for you and some of your colleagues? How were you coming up with such advanced, forward-thinking ideas?
It's not. I guess it's no surprise that it was the 2 main people that probably get mentioned the most amongst our crowd, Jacques Vallée and John Keel.
Yeah.
I mean, it took me a long time before I realized just how enmeshed in the esoteric Jacques is.
Right.
And has been.
I mean, he's more of an occultist than a UFO researcher.
He really is. Yeah, and the fact that Keel, I think, self-described, and others certainly have described him as a demonologist.
Yes.
goes to that. I think with Wes and Crash Collusion particularly, it was the drug influence. I would say that the drug influence and how it relates to esoterica and the occult in general, this idea of trying to control one's own mind through ritual and a better understanding of one's own perception and reality making through experimenting with altered states.
Right.
And, Wes and Crash Collusion were, so, I was in high school. I graduated in 1989, and it was really in high school that my UFO interest became an obsession. And that was when Strieber was rising with the rise of the abduction panic. And I was experimenting with altered states, like, through mushrooms, and then discovered McKenna. And so between reading Strieber, Jacques Vallée, and McKenna, and probably Keel too at the same time, it's hard for me to pin down when exactly I was exposed to the first times for each of these authors. But I know with Vallée and McKenna, it was absolutely then, and it had to have been. I mean, Strieber, of course, I knew about because I had this weird experience of reading his fiction book War Day on a rare out-of-country trip when I was in junior high, and it just totally freaking me out. And, growing up terrified that Ronnie Reagan was going to, in a dementia state, press the big red button. But I think that
we have those same fears again, don't we?
It's kind of, yeah. We weirdly we do. But yeah. So I think it was those kind of ideas. I think it was really McKenna, and I think just that aspect of drug culture kind of it has that punk rock counterculture element to it. I can't speak for Wes, but and I've still never actually done DMT, but everything I was hearing caused me to think differently about the nature of consciousness and my own experiments with psychedelics like mushrooms and others. But I think that really probably had the most to do with it, was an alteration of one's own consciousness that even if it wasn't a true heroic dose in the case of McKenna's nomenclature, was enough to kick open some third eye stuff that was like, oh, okay, this is all hallucination, just normal waking up consciousness. And so yeah, and then reading these other people's zines, because I grew up liking. That was the same period of time I was getting into cyberpunk or reading William Gibson. I don't read much fiction. I read very little fiction, but it's like between Gibson and Philip K. Dick, these also kickstarted my ideas. But it was the people I was coming into contact through the zine scene that opened my eyes, and then seeing Vallée in 1992 in Albuquerque, New Mexico, specifically cite Philip K. Dick and his interactions with him in his explication of where he was at with the UFO phenomenon. I'm like this is 1992, and I'm meeting these zine scene people who are like, oh yeah, Philip K. Dick, he's important to you understanding UFOs. And I'm like, what? and that's when I started reading. Like, wait a minute, 2 science fiction authors are the exemplars par excellence for understanding the weirdness that is part of this, like Strieber as a horror and science fiction writer, and Jacques Vallée, or excuse me, well, actually Jacques Vallée, I didn't know this at the time, was a science fiction writer, and but not so much the experiencer in the classics in the sense of Strieber or PKD, but yeah. But yeah, that 1992 lecture, I still turn people onto that because it's so, there's so much of import in that lecture, which he starts by saying, I'm probably the only person here who doesn't know what UFOs are. He's saying this to a room full of MUFON people.
That's such a great shit talk. Yeah, and also Vallée, I feel like, and I might be wrong about this, But in 1992, he was like, he gave himself this kind of moniker, a heretic amongst heretics.
Yes, yes.
Right? So, I mean, like, I feel like Valet's kind of only been appreciated by the larger UFO scene in the last, like, 5 years. Like, where before people were like, even when I was a kid, I can't remember a Valet book. I read half of it and go, this is too weird. Like, I wanted to be ETH. And, like, I didn't get it until I was older. But, like,
it was probably, I believe he wrote the foreword to Communion, or I forget, but I think I was turned on to him probably via Strieber or something like that, and it was like, oh, who's this guy? And then of course the classic, oh, he was the bassist for Lacombe and CE3K, which of course was very influential on me as a child.
Me too.
Just to jump back to the question of how I got
please.
into all this stuff. So whatever year it was that Close Encounters of the Third Kind came out, I'm not sure if it was 78 or 79, or was it even earlier?
Yeah, I think it was 79, I believe, but I might be wrong.
I have this memory, and I've since been trying to tease out the two threads here, and it could just be that I've conflated two different memories, but I have this memory of a Christmas one year as a child getting the bendy E.T. action figure, when the movie came out, and I conflate that with when my then grandparents on my mom's side were visiting us in San Antonio, and my grandmother was telling me, oh, they had this radio station up in the Northeast area, Connecticut, New York, New Jersey area, and she's like, oh, we've had all these great people on, including this artist friend of mine who's interviewed all these people from around the world who've had the exact same experience of being abducted by aliens. And I think that may have been my earliest exposure. I mean, I'd read, Daniel Cohen and other children's UFO books at my elementary school library. And I'd certainly heard about abductions, but I was still like those books always focused more on the Close Encounters with Monsters, the Kellys, Hopkinsville, or the Flatwoods, and that kind of thing. But the abduction thing, like, that was just starting to like really start rising, and for her to tell me that at that point in my life, I think really seeded in me this idea of, wow, there's all these people around the world having a very similar experience, but they're from different cultures. Now, of course, years later, I'd realized that that's a gross oversimplification, as was Bud Hopkins' wont, because that's who she was talking about. Yes. And sure enough, in Bud's first book, he cites that was the beginning of his big UFO career, was going on her radio station. It's in the book, and I'm like, holy mackerel! So
that's wild. Yeah. And that was, well, that's really interesting. Yeah, I mean, but like, it's. I mean, I guess we could kind of just start jumping into. Well, actually, before we do that, I do want to talk about the Anomaly Archives, because I want to make sure we do highlight that, because I think your work is so wonderful. I've devoured your entire YouTube channel, but tell us about the Anomaly Archives and the work you're doing there, because it's absolutely fantastic. I'm all for any kind of preservation in this stuff, so I really applaud you.
Well, thank you. Yeah, as the UFO obsession typically unfolds, you start purchasing UFO books. And unless you are the most voracious reader, but again, the rise of the internet is like, I think that starts cutting into one's ability and time to sit and read with a book. Sad as that is, but yeah, there came this point around 2003 where I had accumulated hundreds and hundreds of UFO books. I was accumulating them faster than I could read them, and not just UFO books, but paranormal books, ghost books, haunting books, altered states of consciousness books, the whole gamut of anomalous, alternative, new age, fringe, pseudoscience type literature, and then Wesley Nations, who I mentioned with Crash Collusion, he had his own large collection. And speaking of DIY Xerox zines, he was working in a Kinko's, which is what helped him print on the cheap his really well done zine. He was, self-publishing it through, software technology, but printing it on Kinko's machines.
Hell yeah.
Anyway, when he decided to move out of Texas because he wanted better scenery, like real mountains, and he went west to California, he didn't want to take all those books. And so his editor, who went by the pseudonym John Carter, he split the books between us. And so John Carter got some of the books, and then I got the bulk of them. And so but by at that point I had over 1,000 books. Damn. And I was just like, this is crazy. And I'd already been kind of toying with this idea of, wouldn't it be great if there was a library that was just focused on this? I've grown up in libraries. I'm not a librarian with any training or accreditation, but I've always lived and worked in them, and they're near and dear to my heart as being places of import for preservation purposes, but also public education, giving people access to information in a way that's cheaper than having to buy all those books.
Right.
So it just seemed natural to try and start a library, an archive focused on this. And a few years earlier, in 1999, ironically, as I had been researching at a local grant library, a library focused on helping people find grant money, I went to there and started looking for grant money for parapsychology and UFO research. Didn't find much, but the librarian said, "Oh, if you're interested in that, you needed to talk to this nonprofit called INAX. They have offices here in the building." And they put me in contact with people from that organization. And so this is all 1999, I became a board member and started being active with them. And they helped me found in 2003 the Scientific Anomaly Institute, aka the Anomaly Archives. It's an official 501c3 nonprofit focused on preservation of anomalous materials, whether they be academic materials or paper files of witnesses, experiencers, or researchers, to just popular literature, the bulk of what people think of when they think of UFO books and that sort of thing. And so, and then the other half of the mission and goals is the public education element of that. Not so much research or investigation oriented, though we do get a lot of inquiries. And so I got some help from all these other people that were in the nonprofit INAX, Institute for Neuroscience and Consciousness Study, that I was a part of, and also a local nonprofit called the Human Potential Center. One of the people, there's just all this background here. So one of the founding advisors for INAX was Hal Puthoff, and and one of the and the man behind the Human Potential Center, his mother is like the grand dame of homeopathy, and he himself introduced me to Ray Stanford, who, of course, he grew up in the shadow of, through his, I think, association with his mother, and so I just had all these great people around me who were like, "You're a nice guy. You've got good goals. Let's help this kid." And so we started that in 2003, and so we've been going ever since. And we were growing and growing and growing. We had been we started at a small location on the Human Potential campus, the Human Potential Center's property in South Austin, and then eventually INAX got their own place up in North Austin, and they were gracious enough to let us move in with them. And so for probably another 10 years, we were there with them in Northwest Austin. And that's when, actually back in the original locations, when we started doing, lecture events, we would have authors and researchers come and present. Some of those earliest ones was former military remote viewer Paul Smith, but our very first presenter was Adam Go-Rightly.
Oh, hell yes. We love Adam here.
he was promoting, that crackpot historian was presenting his work on his book, The Prankster and the Conspiracy, all about Kerry Thornley, which blew many, many minds.
I'm sure it did. Yeah.
So yeah, we basically we now have over 7,000 books, thousands of periodicals, hundreds, if not thousands, of digital files. Our long-term goal is, of course, to provide digital versions of all that material so that you don't have to necessarily physically visit the library. At the height of our success, which went from about 2018 to 2020, 2019. Gee, I wonder what could have happened. We had gotten this fantastic location on our own, right downtown in Austin, just across from the Rainy Street district. It's like the alternative drinking district to 6th Street. And it was just a fantastic facility. And excuse me, we had plenty of space. We were expanding. There was an event space in the building. It was just great. And then, COVID happened, and that just changed everything. And that's when there was, as much as that affected everybody, businesses, for-profits and nonprofits alike, the nonprofit who was our landlord merged with the local YMCA, who was moving in and needed more space. And so they started not renewing the leases of all the other nonprofits in the building. And so when our lease was up, we were praying that they would let us stay there. But as things happened, that wasn't going to happen. And that's when, if you've devoured our YouTube channel, you've seen all the Streamathon videos from 2020, which is a fantastic. There's so much material there, so many gracious donations on the part of their time and information from these many speakers that presented for that to raise money. And we raised half of our goal, which is our annual budget, which is really modest compared to most nonprofits. And that's all rent, But the joke now is that we had to go into storage in February of 2021, and we've been in storage ever since. And it breaks my heart every single day. And we're still trying desperately to find a way forward, but we are searching for the most elusive anomaly of them all: affordable rent in Austin, Texas.
Well, I mean, and Austin is like, LA expensive now, or maybe not quite, but like it's, I've been to Austin quite a bit, and I've been going for the last 20 years. And it just like every time I go there, I'm like, wow, it's getting a lot fancier.
Yeah.
But it still has that weird vibe. It's still a great place, of course.
Yeah, no, I will refrain from my usual grousing, but Austin. I haven't lived anywhere else really. I was born in San Antonio, raised in Austin, and I've really never lived anywhere else for any length of time other than holidays in San Antonio or Houston or elsewhere. But it's a very strange oasis in the heart of Texas. So.
Yeah, it is. There's a place I'm fond of. I went to college at called Lawrence, Kansas, and I feel like it's very similar. Where it's like Lawrence has no business being in Kansas, like where it's like this very kind of punk rock liberal town. William S. Burroughs lived there for the last 30 years of his life, and like it's just got a great energy about it.
Yeah.
But I have so many questions for you. But I do want to get into the piece you wrote for the Reframing the Debate. Because, first off, as I was mentioning, I do think it's a book everyone should, run out and buy, truly. But your chapter really, I think, is where I'm at currently with, the world of the weird. It really, spoke to me in a dramatic way. But your piece, please correct me if I'm getting the title wrong, is Para-Crypto-Ufology.
It actually has a much longer, stupid title called Trufos versus UFOs.
Yeah, you're right. I'm sorry. Yeah.
Planetary poltergeists and weapons of mass something or other.
Right. I'm sorry. Yeah, no.
Weapons of mass enchantment. Yeah.
It's a wonderful title. It says it all. But you're kind of in this piece synthesizing a handful of ideas, and you're really I also like how it's kind of like a multiple theory interpretation of the UFO phenomenon. But before we start picking apart, is there a way to just kind of give the broad strokes of what you were getting at here? That is not easy to do. So if it's we can, but just tee it off if you could.
So first and foremost, it was based on 2 lectures that I gave several years before that, and those you can actually go and watch those lectures, those 2 lectures, UFOs and Consciousness, parts 1 and 2, and so I was trying to condense that, and those lectures, and as I say, I think at the beginning of the piece is, I was trying to do an insane info dump to allow people to find the threads that they want to pull on. So I was just trying to give people as much information as possible in a short amount of time that are the things that I think that there's a lot of import in when trying to study and understand the UFO phenomenon and the phenomena that surround it. And given that there's so many different aspects of it that one can focus on, I thought that would be helpful. And I definitely, the one criticism I think is very accurate about the piece is that it's real stream of consciousness.
Well, I mean, sure, I guess it is. I guess, but for me, it to me it operates like the phenomenon. Like the way you were writing, the way it's writing, the tone of it to me is very much for me. I guess I'll say maybe it's not for everyone. I love the stream of consciousness aspect to it because it does feel like it's like oh, I'm having a beer with someone and they're kind of telling me their thoughts on UFOs, and I love that because I actually feel like it's very hard to write like that in a cogent way, and you did it. You pulled it off great.
Well, thanks. So the main gist is this true foe, the true UFO phenomena versus the UFO, UFA, UX, false foe UFO phenomena. And so I was on one hand trying to seed the audience's mind with ideas that I think are integral to trying to apprehend the nature of the true UFO phenomena, whatever that is.
Right.
And again, granted, this is all speculation, and that's one of the things I lead with is if anybody, says they know what UFOs are, you should run screaming from them.
Agree, 100%.
And the other half of this is the more paranoid, parapolitical aspect, which is something that, again, Jacques Vallée has been at the forefront of, which is pointing out how and why various human agencies have manipulated people's beliefs about the phenomenon. And I think that's another really important aspect of this. So it was, one half, oh, here's my heartfelt, intuitive speculations about the nature of the UFO phenomenon.
Right.
The true phenomenon. And the rest is like, and by the way, warning, spoiler alert, you're going to get messed with by the powers that be.
But that thing, like that's not really speculation though. Like,
Right.
like that part of it is not, and it's actually like, I think an important warning, especially with the current mainstream ufology, where like it is grift central. And there are so many people being taken for like being led down some really sketchy paths, in my opinion. And I think it's like bad. I think it's actually a very harmful thing to mess with like people's like beliefs and ideas like this. It's not good.
yeah. That's why I mean, there are plenty of people who espouse ideas that I think are valid, but it's if they don't preface it or bookend it with, but I don't know this for certain.
Yeah.
And so it's just that so often people are expressing a belief as if it's fact, and I think it's really hard for people to discern that, and it's harder and harder for all the reasons that we endlessly talk about these days.
Absolutely.
And so I just, it's like whenever I talk about any of this stuff, I know I'll spew some wild and crazy BS, but at the same time, I'm like, well, here's what I can verify, and here's what makes me think may also be true, but really, I'm just be sure to understand, I'm not saying it is absolutely this or absolutely that.
Right.
And
right.
I think that's something that there needs to be a lot more of.
Right. I agree. Well, so just to kind of like, tease it out, like maybe just all kind of, I what I did, I started like writing questions, and then I was like, basically I'm just reinterpreting interpreting your quotes, and so I'm going to pull quotes out if you don't mind.
Sure.
I mean, so I'm just going to read a quote, and then maybe we'll just kind of pick it apart or pick about like why you put this in there, and like this just felt like the best way to do it for me. So I hope you don't mind. But okay, here's the first one. Terence McKenna also encouraged that notion when he said, one possible view of the flying saucer is that it is a kind of projection from the consciousness of the planet, that is Gaia. And I think that in a sense, Jung was really onto something when he saw it coming from the unconscious, almost as though that the UFO was a manifestation of Gaia as Mother Goddess. Ooh, I like that, Smiles.
Yeah. Again, this is one of those interpretations of or speculative hypotheses that has a really warm place in my heart. And when I was trying to collect my thoughts in writing the original lectures that this paper is based on, I was continuing to collect like all the notes I'd written about. Oh, this person actually alluded to that possibility. I mean, I was really surprised when I went back and through my notes. It's like, wait a minute. Oh yeah, Jacques even suggested this in one place, and oh, Jenny Randall's over in the UK. Yep. She also suggested this, and it's very much a part of Paul Devereaux's Earthlights ideas.
Absolutely.
Both Jacques as a romantic Frenchman, McKenna as this, romantic elf imp person, and Jenny Randalls as this, to me, incredibly lovable, brilliant writer, outsider in a lot of ways, that people don't know enough about these days.
I know.
They all were people, and again, Devereaux, who very much, he's talking about this idea of Earth-generated luminous phenomena, and he's obsessed with ancient sacred sites and standing stone circles and ley lines and spirit paths and native endogenous cultural beliefs about balls of light, and to me, that is the basis of the phenomena. I mean, the one thing we can say is that all cultures on this planet have a long tradition of believing in disembodied consciousness in the form of luminous phenomena, whether they be balls of light or will-o'-the-wisps or some kind of glowing apparition. All these things are normal. They're not paranormal. They're not even anomalous. They are to us from a modern materialistic perspective paradigm, but it goes again to this idea, and I think the one time I wrote to Jacques back in the 90s was to express my own ideas that were very much informed by him and others, that perhaps the phenomena, one interpretation would be that the planet herself has these mechanisms of manifestation that we interact with, and that might have evolved to be a part of a teaching mechanism to prepare us for potential galactic citizenship. Or if a planet has any one imperative, I thought, isn't it just like the imperative of life itself to create something that can live on, perpetuate, and expand? And where does it expand past its own organism, past the edge of Earth? It's out there in space. And if that's this planet's evolutionary imperative, that's going to be it possibly on other planets, most likely. And so maybe it's just this mechanism preparing us for inevitable contact, and that it creates these fantastic hallucinations that sometimes actually seem to have physical properties,
right?
And sometimes leave behind physical traces, but absolutely leave behind traces of its manifestation through our experiencing of it and our passing it along through culture, and that maybe that's something that's going on. And McKenna was expressing it there in terms of Jungian theory, and so many of these ideas do hinge on this idea of a weird collective consciousness that is still not very well understood, and yet there's plenty of Eastern traditions that deal with it and have like just the whole Tibetan Book of the Dead, we watch how people die and the states of consciousness they go through during that, and we've done meditation for thousands of years, and here's our book on it. This
is what we learned.
So yeah, I think there's a lot of possibilities there.
Yeah, no, for sure, for sure. And you mentioned too in the book, kind of like that, when people they started, doing fracking, these I don't know if it was oil companies or whatever energy companies, that they noticed that they were triggering luminous phenomena.
Yeah, and this is something I haven't been able to do too much research on, but once you start looking into the Earth lights hypothesis, and in its earliest research efforts, they were going on this idea of like when quartz or other types of minerals are compressed, when the energy is released from that compression, that these plasmas can be generated that are luminous balls of light, and that those shoot out. And there's you can search and find the research on this where they have video of this, and that was probably the earliest stuff I ever saw about that, and that was before I'd even ever heard of the word fracking.
Right.
And but yeah, as you started researching people like Michael Persinger of Laurentian University and his classic works on the TST, tectonic strain theory, which was his materialistic engineering approach. And he was not an engineer, though, but his materialistic approach to Paul Devereaux's more, anthropological research about Earth lights and luminous phenomena. But they both were consulting the same geologists who were pointing to this very evidence, and, pointing to places like Hesdalen, where, and all these other many locations around the globe. And in Texas, there's at least two places with
the
very
Marfa lights,
lights in West Texas, and the Ghost lights on Bragg Road in East Texas.
Right.
Very different geologic environments, desert on the west and swamp on the east, and yet they both have these long histories of luminous ball of light phenomena associated with folklore and paranormal stories. But yeah, it was, I think, in looking, the best thing to do with any researcher that you like is make sure their books have an index and a bibliography, and start reading those other works. And so as you start following through on the work cited by Persinger and Devereaux, you come across all this amazing research into the geologic connections to luminous phenomena. And they range from just this basic idea of like, somehow earth tremors and again, strain on the tectonic plates can generate these luminous phenomena. You get thus what's called earthquake lights, or and lights associated with volcanic eruptions. But then you start seeing these references to like large bodies of water, like reservoirs, and how that can just that somehow that weight on the tectonic plates and whatnot can trigger this thing. But yeah, years later, I started reading about this terrible thing called fracking, that whether regardless of your view of it as a necessary or ethical or good thing, seems to have that same ability, and that it really is intriguing to me, given the nefariousness of some of those corporations. Again, the views expressed by this guy do not necessarily reflect those of the nonprofit. It's intriguing to me, and I was really shocked when I was watching that terrible but wonderful Blue Book TV series where they actually invoked that in one of their episodes. I was like, whoa. Yeah. Like, and they were, of course, dovetailing it with all the more fun mind control speculation, which is a huge part of all of this stuff too. But
it is. Well, it's after I reread the piece yesterday, I went down a Paul Devereaux rabbit hole, and I was reading, about his initial experience that got him all in. He was an art school kid. He sees like a floating rectangle that turns into like a giant image of a figure. Some people who were downstairs in the apartment building saw like a giant cross, but this gave him, he sent him on his path to go study this stuff. And it was this like ball of light, almost like raw data, that turned to a rectangle that then turned to a figure in the sky. But like sometimes, it does seem like balls of light, BOLs, are not just associated with UFOs. Like if you read, and now these stories are coming out more, but like Bigfoot encounters, cryptid encounters. If you see a ball of light in a house, it must be a ghost, but like it's almost like it's this raw form of data that you can graft a simulation upon. And I know that I'm not saying I know this, but it seems like that to me sometimes.
Yeah, no, it's the knowledge of exactly what you just said that caused me to, when I was with my fellow kooks on one of our first, I think it was our first kook out, with Greg Bishop and other fellow kooks.
That's what they call their hangouts. They get together and call a kook out, which I think is wonderful.
Yeah, because we're all kooks. It was the Texufornia, the Texufornia Illuminati, and because most of us were either from Texas or California, but it was on. I guess it was the first one of those in the mid '90s and it was the first time we'd met up. Some of us, first time we'd ever met up in person, and I'll never forget I was tripping on mushrooms around the campfire. Good. And we were all telling weird stories, and I just happened to look up as a green ball of light popped up from behind a tree, a stand of trees like 100 yards away, and started just doing crazy movements. And I'm like, guys. But there was a real fear there. I mean, I wasn't really terrified, but there was a concern of like, oh shit, are we about to have one of these crazy multiple witness abduction experiences where that thing's gonna fly down into us, morph into a UFO, and aliens are gonna come out, or a Bigfoot? Like, like I was really in my mind was like, BOLs can turn into anything,
Be prepared.
But yeah, apparition, ghosts. All kinds of luminous phenomena associated with ghosts and hauntings, and apparitions tend to sometimes be self-luminous, and there's the high strangeness Bigfoot stuff definitely has BOLs, and it's those kinds of things that led people like Keel and others, and so many of us to be like, is there a toe? Is there a theory of everything that covers all this? Well, at the heart of it's got to be BOLs.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I don't think it's, I mean, obviously a ball of light, I mean, so many distant light sightings end up with people projecting their expectations onto it. Mm-hmm. But we're also talking about a phenomenon that may actually be able to mimic and mirror and like tune into your expectations. And I mean, this gets into, these.
No, but I hear you. Like, this is the good stuff, man.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
So
well, yeah, and like I mean, in Devereaux, and like I mean, like it isn't alone. Dr. Greg Little, who I really like his work, People of the Web is really important book to me. But he wrote a book 3 or 4 years ago that he co-authored with Colin Andrews. And
yes,
something I for some reason can't remember the title; it's escaping me. But Dr. Greg Little's like half of the book is mostly about plasma light phenomenon. And he is very much in line after his 50 years of looking into this stuff. This is what, basically, essentially, it's like, this is what we know. Balls of light are it.
Yeah.
This is what we should be focusing on. And I found it very interesting. And he said it in a much more eloquent way than I just did. But so it's like I feel like this is like an idea that's kind of coming around right now.
It really is, and Massimo Teodrani and so many others have in the last several years been putting out these papers that go into great detail about the possibility of living plasmas, conscious plasmas, and that's, I would say, definitely most of the theoretical aspects of that are way above my pay grade, but
right.
But it so resonates with all this past information that was for more of us lay ufology people, and Greg Little's work, Dr. Little's work, is phenomenal. His first 3 books before the book with I think Light Quest, maybe, is that the title? Something?
I think Colin Andrews wrote Light Quest.
I thought that was the one with him
did
and
they
Greg Little.
It very well might be. I'm terrible at titles. I can never remember them.
But if not, I'm going to have to find the other one that you're referring to.
Yeah.
But no, I've literally, like, one of the last times I spoke on the phone with Dr. Little, he was talking about dusty plasmas and conscious entities, and I'm like, yeah, that's pretty much where my mind's been at. Like, again, just came at it from, again, this perspective of like, that's what's in the reports. And
Yeah.
and indigenous peoples have long believed them to be their ancestors or deceased or shamans that are traveling astrally or psychically.
Yep.
And even just, you get these reports of people doing astral projection and like saying, oh, I visited so and so, I floated into their bedroom and saw them sleeping, and then the next day that person's like, I had a dream and I woke up and I saw a ball of light in my room, and they're like, oh, sorry, that was me.
Sorry, dude, I should have let you know I was coming over.
Knock, knock.
Knock, knock. That's amazing. That's amazing. But I wanted to bring up another quote, and it was, in using virtual reality and Google Glass example, as you say, perhaps this is the same way that people, when they go into haunted houses, may be tapping into some kind of informational field that's present and accessing past experiences embedded in that field. This is kind of getting to some like Sheldrake territory.
Yeah, and thank you for mentioning Rupert Sheldrake.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, he's one of these rogue scientists that
Right.
over the years has just turned me on to some ideas that weren't UFO related at all, but suddenly took on an importance that's like, holy crap, like that really informs all kinds of ideas about psychic phenomenon and the nature of the physical world and potentially UFOs. I've long thought, when you look at things like Kirlian photography, or you talk to psychics who can read auras, or other psychics who seem to just literally pick information out of the air when interacting with a subject. And so much of, whether it's Eastern mysticism about, the universe being conscious, just pure consciousness, or radical physics ideas about the universe being pure information,
Right.
or just, it's just light, which, as we know, can be light or a particle or wave or whatever. But like, and then the whole non-causal, non-local interconnectedness. Yeah, it just starts to become an issue where it seems more likely that psychics are just literally like able to tune information from out of the ether, out of this information field, and that they sometimes may perceive it in a way that is, like you say, approximates, or what I said, approximates, Google Glasses or some kind of augmented reality visualization system. I think in the slide I used in the lecture, there was this wonderful drawing I'd seen of a blue apparition of a, like, some Victorian era woman. And it's basically, the idea was like, oh, what if you could go to the cemetery and, with your augmented glasses, you could see a hologram. It's not a literal hologram because it's not projecting. But it's part of the display that is the interface that is the glasses. That can show you the person, and they could be interacting with you, and we have that now. It's like,
yeah, I know.
And so if you just take that kind of technological metaphor and look at all this paranormal anthropological data associated with people's encounters with ghosts and spirits and ancestors and aliens and demons and whatever, it gives one another possible frame of reference that I think is worth exploring, as at least as an analogy or metaphor, and may actually be a literal mechanism of interfacing with the informational world. And you combine that with ideas like John Keel's super spectrum idea,
Right.
that these things that we see on rare occasions are the only reason we perceive them is because our limited blinders of our perceptual faculties, we just get a glimpse of them as they pass through the spectrum of energy that they're coming. They're going down the radiation spectrum from things outside our perceptual range on this end, and then they go through it, and then they go out the other side. They're still there, and this gives it. This is not talking about interdimensional. But that's a whole other potential layer there. But just this idea that there's plenty of things around us So many of these ideas, I've been listening to your recent guests, and it's like, oh yeah, so and so said this, and so like
Yeah.
this is these. Thankfully, these ideas have taken hold, and I think the best of alternative ufology, who thus are not yet you apologists.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, Sheldrake's idea of morphic resonance, morphogenetic fields was a radical idea that literally caused people to suggest his book was meant for burning.
Yeah, that's what someone that you quoted that. Like, yeah, that was one of the reviews. It's like, well, there's never been a book that was more fit for burning or something to that
and
effect. I'm like,
got him kicked off of the TEDx YouTube
Yeah.
channel or whatever.
mhm.
And because all he had the audacity to suggest is that that maybe the laws of nature are more like rules or guidelines, and that the reason things happen the way they do is because they've happened that way so many times before.
Right.
And his old analogy of, like, if you were rolling a billiard ball across a billiard table, inevitably it's going to wear down a trough, and so those billiard balls are going to more easily go down the same path that they've been going down, just because there's a
Right.
well-worn groove there. And that is the analogy for the laws of nature, being more like just rules or guidelines. And it has all kinds of amazing potential implications. And never forget, it was I believe it was Sheldrake and McKenna and Abrahams, I think, because they did those famous lectures together. But I think all three of them, or at least Rupert, was involved in the crop circle making contest back in the 90s, where it was like, well, we know humans are claiming that they can make these. Well, how well can they do it? Can they do it and be quiet enough that they elude our detection at night in a field? And can they approximate all these other anomalous aspects that are associated with these strange pictograms in the wheat or other materials? And so I think he's a great example of somebody who's been a real frontier thinker.
Yeah. Well, a lot of times these people are appreciated like after they're gone, or 50 to 100 years later, and he may just end up being one of those guys. We're like, no, it's really interesting. Well, you also quoted Thomas Bearden's idea that our collective anxieties are physically manifesting in a worldwide type of poltergeist activity that causes physical manifestations. And I love that. And it's also kind of like, you kind of followed up with, it's like UFO encounters, like perhaps are reflecting societal issues or anxieties. And I think also that kind of could potentially explain how the real phenomenon, so to speak, does have this constant like changing and evolving aspect, right? It's like, we had the flying saucer era. Well, we don't really see those anymore. And then, flying triangles, so on and so forth. But like, I think that idea is really interesting, how it's taking our anxieties and physically manifesting it,
Yeah. Bearden's a strange character. And he was definitely of that militaristic Cold War mentality, that he really put so much of his own fear of Soviet, Russian militarism, world domination goals. That fear really informed his perspective. But beyond that, just the fact that he, as this weird physicist, was suggesting some kind of stigmata, tulpa writ large kind of phenomenon, was really intriguing to me and many others. And apparently the CIA, you can find documents of his on the CIA website.
Yes.
And I think what I really liked about him, again, was he, in his diagrams, which he worked on, I think, with some artist named Forrest Crawford, who may still be around, associated with the Ozark Conference, I forget, but did these diagrams. He called this latent psychic consciousness Zarg, I believe, and it was illustrated as this like sleeping dragon. But he also included like these kind of like Illuminati style pyramids as a way of showing the different levels of the collective unconscious. And those ideas really sank in for me again with this ecological idea of, okay, what if if you're looking at this from like an environmental phenomena, that somehow there are these window areas, these hot zones, these anomalous zones where the veil is thinner, whatever, however you want to phrase it, and the average person can go through those and are much more likely to have a strange encounter. And then if you work in all the other factors that over the last several decades, different parapsychological research has put forth as far as sidereal time and the effect of the global resonance, electromagnetic state of the planet, and the psychic consciousness state of the witness. All these things can lead to somebody having experiences in these areas. But his hierarchical example really gave this idea of, okay, so what a person perceives is likely to be influenced by the psychic ecology of the location. And so, I mean, obviously the most telling, the most profound co-creation factor would be your own upbringing. Like, okay, so if you're Roman Catholic, you may be predisposed to thinking in terms of angels and demons,
right?
And even if you don't think you're, I'm a non-practicing, whatever, like you've been enculturated with that, and
Yes.
and then so that's the first and foremost thing that's most likely to affect you. I think in terms of what you project onto the phenomena or what it reads and gives to you. That is the big conundrum there. But that there also could be the effects of regional psychic collective consciousness. And so, certain locations are likely to have some kind of psychic inertia, psychic cachet of imagery, and this could be like, okay, well, you're going through a desert, and well, the indigenous people that used to live there or inhabited it for hundreds of years, had their own mythology, and maybe if something like this erupts into your perception, that local psychic component could override your own expectations, and maybe you'll see something that's more akin to their mythology.
Right.
And so that all kind of, at least that was my reading of what I've read of Bearden. But it also was reflected in some weird comments made by Dean Radin in an interview with Greg Bishop for Excluded Middle years ago, where Dean was talking about, well, I can't really speak to the details, but I'm privy to basically what he was describing was psychotronic technologies that might have a side effect, like they're not intended for this purpose, but they have the side effect of perturbing the local geopsyche environment and maybe triggering these kinds of phenomena. And that this is, again, we think in terms of fields of effect, and this kind of idea that's expressed by Valet and others about like Fatima, where the people furthest away only saw like a ball of light, but the people closer up were seeing like actual human-shaped apparitions,
right?
And obviously you could say, well, you're further away, you're going to have a less defined image, but the implication they're trying to express is that it's something about this your consciousness interacting with that field. And this gets to the heart of Valet's idea that this might be a technology, but I'm saying just set aside the idea of a technology. I'm saying this is like just a mechanism in the environment itself.
Right. Right.
But again, going to Bearden, he was putting this all in the context of trying to like explain cattle mutilations and this idea that, and I'm probably going to oversimplify it, but like this enmity that he was perceiving of the Russians and Soviets hating us so much, and trying to strike at the heartland of America, and what exemplified the heartland of America but cattle, and that somehow that psychic unrest was manifesting in this way. I don't know. It reminds me of ideas about poltergeist phenomena and paranormal phenomena in the sense of like, what you push down on psychically, in your own unconscious ends up erupting elsewhere in dramatic ways.
Hey, that's interesting. But I like that.
But at the core of what I think I was trying to get at, and it is something that has been hinted at, I would say, by Vallée, and it's kind of inherent in the very talk of aliens. If you consider the time we're in now, where the idea of illegal aliens is a hot button issue, but it's always been. And even in the 80s, I think it was still not like it wasn't as intense as it is now, but
Right.
it was still then. I mean, that's when I first started realizing this dichotomy between the two ruling parties about immigration, and I tried to tap into discussing this in my 1995 presentation to the Society for the Anthropology of Consciousness conference in Berkeley, and there's a line I wrote that I really love, but I can't remember it off the top of my head. But it basically has to do with this idea. There's no better example of our collective sense of medical alienation than these hybridizing, abducting aliens. Like,
Yes.
and so there was a few people in the 1990s that we were seeing a reflection in the narrative of the abduction phenomena, this idea of, well, whatever the reality is, it kind of makes sense to see this sense of medical alienation and hybridization, and the abortion issue was of course still pretty hotbed issue then as now, but that maybe this is somehow just a reflection of that in these narratives. Vallée, I think, was getting at, like, literally, like, this is more about, like, the human angle, like the false faux UFO phenomena, the human generated angle, sometimes manipulating people's beliefs, these unconscious concerns, and manipulating people's beliefs through. I think he's suggested, as others have suggested, that maybe some of these abduction cases are what came to be called MILABs, military abductions, or something.
Yeah. Right.
But there was one more thing I was just gonna say, like, professor of history, Dr. Greg Agigian, my introduction to his work was at the Showtime or UFO docuseries he appears in from a few years ago. It was the J.J. Abrams one, I think.
Yeah, I can't remember the title. It's gosh.
But he talked about.
I know what you're talking about. Yeah.
Yeah. So he put forth this idea of, like, if you look at the types of UFO encounters as they changed over time, and he puts a lot of import on the fact that, like, when the abduction cases started happening, there was this shift in the public consciousness that involved, like, home intruders, and it reminds me that. I expressed this to him, that, like, yeah, Loren Coleman once said that John Keel's Mothman prophecies was the ufologies in cold blood.
That's great.
But so that's, after he's written this book, after the flying saucers came, that's this global history of the UFO phenomena. He, towards the end of that, and in other things he's written since, and what he's working on next, is focusing on the abduction period. And I think he's really going to dive into some of these very ideas, and I think he's probably going to link it to the satanic panic.
Yes,
and
that's too coincidental. During the whole when Bud Hopkins' poster came out, that is just when the satanic panic was really, like, heating up.
Yeah.
It's very interesting. Well, I do kind of want to, with the limited time we have left, I do want to touch upon some of the, human manipulation of the UFO phenomenon. And one thing I forgot, I originally read it, but I totally forgot that Carl Jung and Alan Dulles did some work for Alan Dulles. And, maybe that's where Dulles got the idea to manipulate people for psychological warfare. So I want to read this quote from a chemist and researcher on the Manhattan Project, Leon Davidson. And this is a quote: Dulles also adopted a concept from his old friend Carl Jung and co-opted the myth that benign aliens have visited Earth for millennia. He used magicians' illusions, tricks, and showmanship to blend in sightings, landings, and contacts with the legitimate military test sightings. Later, Dulles found the saucer believers and their clubs an ideal propaganda vehicle. That is That is a powerful, loaded quote right there.
Yeah. Leon Davidson's somebody I really hope we see more research, biographical information about. He was one of the earliest false UFA/UX proponents, as exemplified by that quote, thinking that at the core of so much of the birth of the modern UFO era was some kind of psychological warfare, psyop, disinfo campaign on the part of Dulles and the CIA and other intelligence agencies and the military industrial complex. And yeah, that is the other half of the paper that I wrote, and was focusing on all that, because there is a point at which you really can look at all the classic cases and through a different lens, the lens of parapolitics, and consider them as possible, non-lethal warfare, weaponry testing, psychological warfare, psyops, and thus the name of the radio show that I did with my good friend Mac White for so many years, PSIOP, PSYOP Radio.
I used to listen to it.
Oh, really?
Yeah, I loved it. I did, yeah.
Decoding the psychological warfare machinations within the paranormal and parapolitical landscapes. And
it's a great show.
Thanks.
It's a great show.
And so, yeah, there's so much. And again, this is not to say that this is definitive, because I really do entertain agnostic perspective on all this stuff. The Betty and Barney Hill case, there is plenty of information there to go, was that a psyop? Was that were they being manipulated? Or the Flatwoods case? But the thing about Alan Dulles and Jung's connection is fascinating, and I think I became aware of it in H.P. Albarelli's mammoth MK Ultra book called A Terrible Mistake, that's all about the murder of Frank Olson. The myth of Frank Olson being dosed with acid and jumping out of a skyscraper to his death. No,
that didn't happen. Yeah.
No. Yes, he was surreptitiously dosed. Yes, it messed with his mind. But it seems from Albarelli's research that he was having serious ethical, and he wasn't necessarily a good guy. He had his own issues, but like so many people of that era, but was having issues with the work they were doing that was, I think, more under the sub programs of Artichoke and other stuff, but all part of this umbrella of MK Ultra, and that he was considering that they were worried about him speaking out, and so they got some mafia thugs that they often employed to push him out a window. Yeah,
but Errol Morris made that kind of hybrid documentary dramatization thing. We're just reiterating what you're saying. Yeah. And I think that's kind of almost accepted now. That
I think so.
The story that we heard was not the story that happened.
Yeah. But it goes to this weird connection between Jung and Dulles is certainly suggestive, and I don't know. There's a whole weird. I think it was Dulles whose son experienced traumatic brain injury from one of his war injuries, and this somehow got twisted by Dulles into his intent to have our own brainwashing programs, and that's what launched MK Ultra. Never mind the infiltration by all the Nazis.
Which is, they went on to run defense companies.
Yeah.
And very sketchy.
Yeah, so it is a weird irony that so many of the people I respect and the ideas that I am espousing about this idea of the import of understanding the collective unconscious, a Jungian concept that's just one way of framing this whole idea of, like, whether you call it Akashic records or race memory, or just this idea that there's a sea of consciousness that is that we're able to tap into.
Yep, full of archetypes.
And that the archetype experience, that's one of the thinnest book with the longest title by Dr. Greg Little, which is a really good one. I can't remember the subtitle because that's the long part, but it's called The Archetype Experience is the main title. But this idea that if you, trying to understand people's encounters with the true UFO phenomena, but even maybe the false UFO phenomena,
Yep.
Can be read in like you were saying at the beginning of this talk, dream logic and
Yeah.
dream imagery and symbolism.
Right. And just to kind of throw in there like an example of MK Ultra, it's like, and this isn't like, this is pretty widely known now. There's, there was recently a new Ted Kaczynski documentary.
Yep.
Oh my God, what was his name? The
Unabomber. Yeah.
Yeah. But I mean, Ted Kaczynski was this like wonder kid, like genius. I kind of skipped high school and went straight to Harvard, right? And when he was a teenager, he volunteered on the Harvard campus to work with MK Ultra.
Yeah, that's it. So
I mean, that's wild, man.
yeah. So the lecture, part 2 of the lecture that essay is based on, there's a whole section where I'm like, here is the legacy of MK Ultra that we are still dealing with, because it caused so much societal disruption, and that's one of the many things I listed. It's like all these different people, were influenced by this and went on to do horrible atrocities.
Yep.
And it was all with our taxpayer money.
We funded it.
Yeah.
Well, it's God, well, we could do a whole show on that, couldn't we? But like, so even like some examples, like I'm trying to like like with like disinformation, I suppose, is like the mainstream word for it. But like you do name some cases, as examples where it's like these kind of deserve maybe a fresh look under the lens of maybe some psychotronic MK Ultra-ish fuckery. And that is the Flatwoods Monster, Antonio Villas-Boas, which now a lot of people kind of like are like, yeah, that was probably CIA, and Betty Barney Hill. But like one example you bring up with Betty Barney Hill, which I forgot, is that Barney described a totally different. He said he saw what looked like a Nazi.
Yeah.
I mean, I totally forgot about it until I read that thing, and then he eventually kind of fell in line with Betty's narrative.
Yeah.
But it's what the hell, man? That's weird.
Yeah. No, that's what I was saying. There are all these classic cases. You can re-examine them. They all have elements that, I mean, some of the same elements that I might point to in the Betty and Barney Hill case are also things that people have used as part of their ETH explanation, as far as just, because that's the thing, is so much of the literature of abduction and contact and close encounters of the third kind cases involves people feeling like mental telepathy, and what we do know of these various technologies that have been experimented with that can induce more or less synthetic telepathy. This what is commonly referred to as mind control technologies, but as always, it's really important to distinguish between what we can verify and what we can't. But yeah, that is one of the elements with the Betty and Barney Hill case, was just that initial. And maybe that was just more of an intuitive thing, maybe it wasn't like literally he saw a goose-stepping Nazi that was one perpetrating the experience on them, but like maybe he just sensed a fascistic element.
Right.
But again, Albarelli also even made me aware of similar possible parapolitical explanations, covert operation explanations for things like the Pascagoula, Mississippi case.
Right.
And like to the Villas-Boas case, like it was intriguing to me in Jacques Vallée's Forbidden Science Journals, volumes 1 through 6. One of those volumes is where I think it was volume 5, where he first intimated this connection to Jeff Kripal and Rice University and the founding of the Archives of the Impossible there. Which they now say it's been in operation for 10 years, but they only did the grand opening and announced it in 2020, and opened it in 2022. So whatever. But Vallée donates his materials, and among them he mentions were materials that he had seen. I think he describes them as intelligence agency documents that convinced him of the likelihood that the Villas-Boas case was like some kind of CIA mind control case.
Right.
He never says the name of the person who is so famous for putting out this idea, and I'm drawing a blank on the name. It's like a Russian name. Oh gosh, but there's this particular person I think was associated with either the School of the Americas and also wrote to all kinds of people. There's all kinds of information about this guy's communications with people, but he's the one who started saying, "Oh yeah, I was part of an operation down in South America where we were doing these drug-induced experiments that really do sound like the Villalobos case," and
Right.
which now that so those documents are in the archives of the Impossible in Rice University in Houston, but there's a 10-year moratorium on them being able to be accessed. But these documents are out there. Like I've never actually seen the ones that I can't be sure that are they're the ones that Valet is referencing, but. It was really, I guess, Nick Redfern's the one who's done the most to report on that kind of stuff, as well as like the Flatwoods. It was Redfern that made me aware of the Rand study that really was suggestive of the Flatwoods monster possibly being some kind of psyop.
Right. I remember reading that, and I can't remember which book Redfern talked about that in, because he has written 5,000 books. But I remember just being like at first like super disappointed. I was like, oh man. But then I'm like, yeah, it seems more plausible than an anomalous event. But I did want to ask you like what you're like. I mean, because when we talk about also, I think it's like important to bring up that a big figure in ufology in the 90s and the early 2000s was John Alexander, and his job was working on non-lethal weapons.
Yeah.
I mean, that's almost too coincidental.
Yeah, and there was the whole weird dust-up between he and his wife and Martin Cannon.
Who wrote The Controllers, which that book is now being talked about again after a long period of being forgotten about.
Yeah, no, that was a real important part of my awakening to the parapolitical interpretation of so much of this stuff, and I'm pleased as punch to see that Martin has come out of the shadows the last few years and started talking again and writing more publicly after kind of I don't know if many people really realize this, but for a while after he disappeared off the scene, he was writing under a pseudonym about political stuff, blogging about that for a long time, but he made that all obvious recently in the last couple of years. But that's a phenomenal work, even though he's largely disavowed it, mainly just because he doesn't want to be bothered by the people who are the ones who typically latch on to it, and I get that.
And that's kind of what I like assumed too, because like I saw him interview I think on Erica Luke's show maybe.
Yep.
And he was like, no, because she was mentioning how that book is now becoming a thing for a lot of younger people, and he's like, no, don't read that book. I'm not going to republish it. And I'm like, why?
You don't have to. It's all out there.
I read a PDF. I mean, it was, but the book to me is jaw dropping. Where I'm like, he makes a good case for the kind of military abduction phenomenon.
Yeah.
And I mean, like, once you read that book, you're kind of like, I have to look at this stuff in a totally different way now.
Yeah.
Because it's full of interesting facts. I wanted to ask you this question because I'm like, maybe Smiles knows. In Jacques Vallée's Forbidden Science books, which I actually are like my favorite Vallée books, he mentions this kind of elusive woman named Valerie Ransome. Do you remember that name?
Is she a Texas-based woman?
Yes. That's why I think it was literally at Austin, where he was taken to some, like, I think some agency, but he kind of alludes to the fact that, like, I'm pretty sure she was like a CIA plant, but she was the one who the astronaut Cooper, Gordon Cooper, she kind of latched onto him and was feeding him all this UFO narrative stuff. And that's when he came out and was like, UFOs are real. I saw like 3 of them, and she was kind of manipulating this old astronaut. And Vallée at first, I guess she was like a beautiful woman, and so a lot of like people at the time, these ufologists, were being really like taken in by her, and she was kind of feeding the information, and then she just disappeared.
Yeah, no, I remember that part in the book. I thought it might have been Dallas.
Maybe it was.
But I don't have anything specific about her. But
okay.
I would I would just amplify what you're saying though about Jacques' journals, volumes 1 through 6. There may supposedly be a 7th one, which I'm shocked, but I'm pleased as punch, because they take me so long to get through, because I mean, every page has something I want to take a note on.
Me too.
And they are so valuable and filled with information, not just in terms of like, oh wow, the history of it, when he's been at this since the 50s, 60s, whatever, like all the way back. They are valuable for all of that, but these last few volumes are an amazing prelude to where we are now, and they are literally the information we are at now. So I just watched, and I know we're both not fans of disclosure,
right, yeah.
But I watched Age of Disclosure with some friends on Friday. And there was a point where I was like, well, I guess the only thing I knew here for me was their explication of, the supposed legacy program, and it's being this part, and this part, these 4 parts of the flow chart of who's been in control of the legacy program. And I was like, but I said, otherwise, everything in this I already knew about through Jacques' books.
Exactly.
But that to be clear, that's because he's repeating what he is told by Eric Davis, who is of course one of the main proponents, main people. Hal Puthoff and Eric, both. Hal still an Austinite, Eric previous Austinite. Where did Jacques Vallée first move to in America when he moved from France? Austin, Texas.
Absolutely.
But the after I said that about the legacy program, I literally started back rereading volume 6, the current, most recent version, and literally the next page was the exact specific information that I was saying was the new information I learned in the documentary. So if I had just been reading my book, I would have been like, it's all old news, dude.
Right. Yeah, it is. Well, I mean, like, the thing that's the thing about, like, I mean, like, if you want Vallée, like, like him just talking about the phenomenon of UFOs, all his other books I love them all. But if you want paranoid, parapolitical Jacques Vallée, read Forbidden Science, because especially like the last 3 volumes, I'm like, they are paranoid as all get out in a wonderful, like, truthful way, because like, here's a guy who's been enmeshed in the field since the 50s, and he's just like, look, there is so much disinformation and so many human manipulation of the UFO phenomenon, and it's really like this cautionary tale. Like, I wish more people, I guess younger people getting into this, would, like, before they like step foot in this, read Messengers of Deception, and then go to Forbidden Science books. Like, like, it's an important read right now, because I do think, like, he has been harping on this idea. It's like, you really have to be careful with this information, and what you believe, and who the people, like, what's their motivation behind telling you this and disclosing this stuff to you. Like,
absolutely. That's why MOD, Messengers of Deception from 1979, is one of those books that if anytime I see a used copy in a bookstore, or even a new reprinted version, I buy it. It's like, I mean, on the one hand, I should leave it out there so that somebody else could get it, but I'm like, this is the most important book, and I so often tell people about it. And also because it's also where he first really starts expressing his ideas about the true UFO phenomena and the nature of reality, being like a bulletin board, and his information theory about synchronicity, which he went on to, he's still researching, because he thinks it's important to understanding the UFO phenomena. And so that book in 1979 is one of these trufo versus UFO, false versus true UFO explications. But yeah, man, I can't recommend those books highly enough. And it just, I've said on my show before that, like, there's a particular podcast, UFO podcast. It's a couple of young guys. They're 17ers, post 2017.
Right.
And when they started, they were such, to my mind, Tom DeLonge, Lou Elizondo fanboys.
Yeah.
But to their credit, they help educate me about through their show to the stuff that I'm like, I don't want to pay attention to that, and I hear it from them, and I'm like, oh, that's interesting, I'll have to go look at that. And they've increasingly kind of in some ways, I would say, distanced themselves or become more skeptical of Elizondo's version of his story, and increasingly, promoting Keel and Valet in a way that I'm like, right on, guys.
Yes.
But one of the things that, and they've turned me on to some details that I was unaware of, and also they're some of the ones harping the most about the dangers of Peter Thiel's involvement in the UFO scene, possibly being one of the funders behind Age of Disclosure.
Right.
But there was this one thing that they mentioned. I probably already made myself forget what it was, but I think I did. Oh, no, they were just saying, they were like, oh, how much they were citing Valet and saying his good stuff, and they would pull these long quotes from his books, and I'm like, that's great. So you're aware of all this stuff. And at some point, though, they were like, yeah, but when they came across the part where he mentions him and Gary Nolan meeting Peter Thiel to talk to him about a project, they're like, oh, shit. And like so many people, they're like, oh, no, and it's one of those things is like, dude, we've known forever that Valet has been right there, with all these secret programs. He's been, but I've always trusted his moral and ethical compass, even as I've been like, well, I gotta still worry, and current controversies about that last book of his on the Trinity case. But what I was getting at though is they were at one point, they're like, one of the hosts, these young guys, says something like, well, I don't know, man, I've heard so much Valet, but I really can't get a handle on whether he's a good guy or how he really feels about that political stuff. And I'm like, you who've been citing all these things in his book have not read his book. You're using the search, the digital copy, which is great. Right. That's a great way to use books, but they're not like starting at the beginning and reading it. And because I'm so like, there are so many examples, especially in the last 2 or 3 issues, but even from the very beginning, where he, as this romantic Frenchman who's witnessed the student riots over in France in the 60s, to all this political upheaval that you and I have lived through in our youthful middle age, whatever, where he makes so many comments about the current political landscape, about this, whoever was the current president at the time, or the financial collapse in 2008, and there's no question in my mind that he's on the right side of history.
Yes. Yes. I feel the same way, where it's like, I do have some people like colleagues in these fields where they're like, man, I'm really like, I'm down on Valet, after reading the last couple of Forbiddens. I'm like, I hear you. I'm with you. I feel like morally he's on the right side. And like, I think he was a guy who's like, look, I'll swim in the muddy waters if I can get a little further down the road. And you know what? He did get further down the road by sometimes like, messing with some of these military or military industrial complex people and saying like, actually what they're doing is untrue. He's actually been able to unearth a lot of like disinformation campaigns because he spent time with some of these people.
Yeah.
So I think that's just as valuable. So, I'm still on Team Valet. Like,
I once joked that I want to have his love child.
I mean, look, he's got that head of hair. I mean, it's still, it's beautiful. Smiles, this has been so fun. I've really wanted to talk to you for a long time since I, heard you on Greg's show and, had been digging through the Anomaly archive. So this is such a treat. I did not even get to scratch the surface on the questions I wanted to ask you. So I would beg you to come back on down the road.
You got it.
But this has been a real, real good time. I think you're one of like, truly like the great thinker, like going, commenting on, these subjects that we love so much. So like, I'm really like, in your preservation work, I just can't say enough. Like, I find preservation such an important aspect to all this stuff, because while the mainstream books and the big books and Valet books will probably always be available, so much of this information will just go away. The internet is not a preservation system. It's like things disappear on the internet all the time. So what your work is so important, my friend. And so, I applaud you. My hats off, sir.
Well, Thank you so much. I've really enjoyed the conversation, and I enjoy listening to your other interviews, and highly recommend your show,
Oh, thanks, man.
and love seeing your work in other fields of comedy
Thanks.
and acting.
Yeah,
So
I appreciate it, dude. Oh, that means a lot. Well, folks, you will find. I'm actually going to. I got Smiles' permission to link the chapter from Reframing the Debate, and I will be putting that in the show notes, along with maybe a couple other bits and pieces, and a link to the Anomaly archives and all the stuff where you can find Smiles. You will find that right in the show notes, and click away and enjoy. And I really can't recommend reading that chapter from Reframing the Debate enough. Like, it really is. It was one of those things where I'm like, I would like look up in the air every 2 minutes, go, yes, yes, and it excites me just when I feel like I'm getting bored by the subject. I get to read something like this, and it excites me all over again. So thank you so much for coming on, and thank you for your time. And folks, thank you for listening to another episode of High Strangers. Enjoy your dinners tonight. Peace. Okay.